Subcommittee, the Coast Guard Maritime Transportation will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not only subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today, we discuss the Coast Guard's progress towards implementing the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025, as well as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of 2025. First, I would like to welcome our witnesses, Vice Admiral Schofield, Chief of Staff, the United States Coast Guard, and Ms. Trina McNeil, Director of Homeland Security and Justice Programs at the Government Accountability Office. I understand that both of you, it is your first time testifying today before the subcommittee. I appreciate you being here very much, and it'll be a good hearing. I look forward to your testimony. The Coast Guard is a military service that performs a comprehensive set of safety, life-saving, law enforcement, and national security missions. The service's activities benefit and safeguard recreational boaters, commercial vessel operators, and commercial fishing. The general public benefits from the Coast Guard personnel who bravely and selflessly carry out duties that save lives, enforce the law, battle transnational criminal enterprises, and protect the national security and territorial integrity of the United States. They perform all these functions exceptionally well, especially in light of the fact that the service is an organization that is chronically under-resourced. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act was a historic $25 billion investment in the Coast Guard. It represents an effort to clear the way for the Coast Guard to recapitalize its dilapidated shoreside service and air assets and to create a 21st century service capable of meeting the 21st century challenges and threats. The bill provides for the equivalent of staggering 15 years worth of annual procurement funding, and it's the largest single investment in the Coast Guard's history. The Coast Guard has obligated a large portion of these funds provided by the law. This committee and Congress have a responsibility to ensure the dollars entrusted to the Coast Guard are being spent responsibly and as they were intended. To do that, we require clarity on where the assets being procured will be home ported and how the Coast Guard plans to build the shoreside infrastructure necessary to sustain them. Importantly, this includes sufficient housing and related facilities for the Coast Guard members who will crew these platforms. The Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025 authorizes appropriations for numerous assets, including the 12th National Security Cutter, 3 fast response cutters, a commercial icebreaker, and the Arctic Security Cutter program, including evaluating foreign shipyards in Finland and Sweden. Both bills also establish accountability measures to ensure the service is responsive to congressional direction and is acting as a good steward of taxpayer dollars. Beyond these accountability measures, the bill also authorizes appropriations for operations and support and procurement and investment accounts through fiscal year 2027 at amounts sufficient for the Coast Guard to begin increasing the number of uniformed and civilian personnel needed to maintain the assets purchased with reconciliation funds, as well as to hire a sufficient maritime safety workforce. The legislation also takes measures to ensure that members needed to serve on these assets had sufficient health care and child care. The Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025 imposes needed accountability requirements related to the home porting and maintenance, acquisition planning, a long-standing issue for the Coast Guard. We are concerned that the service's apparent lack of planning puts not just modernization efforts, but also mission accomplishments in jeopardy. We are interested in learning today how the Coast Guard will meet these accountability requirements. Coast Guard modernization efforts are taking place under the architecture of Force Design 2028 plan, which envisions a comprehensive overhaul of the service's leadership, organization, technology, and contracting and acquisition process. So far, the Coast Guard has undertaken several actions to begin implementation of Force Design 2028, including growing the workforce by over 1,100 positions, realigning 68% of positions across the Coast Guard headquarters, and realigning the service's top acquisitions projects. To help meet the goals of future personnel growth, the Coast Guard has also purchased an additional training center in Birmingham, Alabama. Today's hearing provides a forum to articulate where the Coast Guard is pursuing the goals of Force Design 2028 and the path to successfully and completely implement all its objectives. The Government Accountability Office has carefully, extensively examined Coast Guard programs and management practices over the years. They bring an important perspective to the discussion about what proper stewardship of appropriated funds and responsible planning and administration of a large government agency should look like. I will be listening with a keen ear to the points Ms. McNeil makes and any recommendations she has. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to once again state that the Coast Guard has failed to provide the committee with statutorily required long-term acquisition planning documents for years on end. This persistent failure to meet legally mandated reporting requirements raises serious concerns about whether the service is making appropriate spending decisions. Congress recognizes the value of the Coast Guard and delivers and wants the service to reach its fullest of its potential. The continued growth and investment of the Coast Guard is contingent upon continued investment in by the service by Congress, clear transparency and meaningful accountability of how the Coast Guard is setting its priorities, allocating its resources, and truly planning for its immediate and future needs are key to maintaining the levels of congressional support necessary for the organization to continue to grow and meet all the demands for its services. Lastly, I want to recognize two staff members who will soon be departing the subcommittee. Lieutenant Commander Lindsay Shakal served as the subcommittee's Coast Guard Fellow over the last year. She left her mark on the subcommittee, helping to strengthen the service and providing expert legal analysis. The subcommittee's legal assistant, Spencer Thompson, is also departing to pursue an aviation career after multiple subcommittee internships and nearly 2 years on the subcommittee, where he supported passage of the Coast Guard's reconciliation investments and the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025. To both of you, I wish you the best of luck in the future endeavors. I now recognize Ranking Member Carbajal for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Ezell. I will yield to our Ranking Member, Mr. Larson.
Mr. Larson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal, for holding this hearing to examine the significant changes underway at the Coast Guard. Congressional oversight is more important than ever as the Coast Guard undergoes transformational change as a result of recent authorizations, reconciliation funding, and the Force Design 2028. I want to thank our witnesses, Vice Admiral Douglas Schofield and Ms. Triana McNeil, for being here today to discuss the Coast Guard's successes and challenges in implementing recently enacted laws and in obligating the funding from reconciliation. Despite these investments in the reconciliation bill, GAO reports that Coast Guard is not only falling behind its acquisition and procurement targets, but has made operational decisions that have actively harmed its ability to carry out essential duties. A couple of points I want to make. It is unacceptable the Coast Guard has not yet restored the dozens of stations that have been closed or downgraded since 2024. These closures have reduced the agency's ability to effectively conduct search and rescue operations across our country, a decision with life or death consequences. A 2025 GAO report found that due to personnel shortages, the Coast Guard closed 23 seasonal boat stations and reduced SAR coverage associated with 19 other stations. This reduced SAR capability has put a strain on local first responders. The Commandant has said that the Coast Guard's search and rescue mission represents a sacred trust with the American people. And the agency must prioritize using its new resources and service members to restore that sacred trust. A question I will have when we get to questions is, when is the Coast Guard going to reconstitute 42 search and rescue focused stations? I'm also concerned the administration is going to negatively impact the Coast Guard's efforts to curb sexual assault, sexual harassment, and harassment. While I believe the Commandant is truly invested in this issue, the administration's decision to shutter the Women's Leadership Initiative, the Federally Employed Women and Women's Leadership Council, all that limits the voice of women in the service, the very people whose input is needed when developing policies to combat sexual assault and sexual harassment. Congress enacted dozens of reforms in response to Operation Fouled Anchor, which revealed flagrant and negligent mishandlings of sexual assault and sexual harassment cases involving Coast Guard personnel. Some of these reforms included expedited transfers for victims and survivors, updating the process for obtaining protective orders, and establishing a confidential reporting system. The women and men of the Coast Guard deserve the immediate and complete implementation of these reforms as we work to eliminate sexual assault and harassment from the service. I do want to acknowledge the Coast Guard has had success in implementing parts of recent authorizations, and something near and dear to the Pacific Northwest is in the 2022 Coast Guard Authorization Act that authorized the creation of a whale desk traffic alert system in our state, a new program to protect orcas and other marine life from vessel strikes by providing operators and mariners with near real-time location data. The program has been a success in my home state, allowing for safer maritime operations and reductions in noise pollution around whales. I'm pleased that Congress reauthorized this program, but with a recent whale strike in Alaska, we need to look forward to working with the Coast Guard to expand it to other regions. I look forward to engaging with our witnesses on the progress the Coast Guard's making to modernize their organization and ensure that Coasties have the necessary funding, resources, and infrastructure to save lives, protect the American public, and to keep commerce flowing. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I'd like now to welcome our witnesses. Mr. Carvajal.
Thank you, Chairman Ezell, and thank you to our two witnesses for being here today. Over the past year, we have spoken on many occasions about what reconciliation funding is going to do for the Coast Guard. Now that it's being spent, congressional oversight isn't just appropriate, it's necessary more than ever. I am glad that we are now talking about the implementation of policies and projects that have come out of prior Coast Guard authorizations, reconciliation, and the Commandant's vision for the service. But I must say, it can be exceptionally frustrating when the agency refuses to be more transparent, sidesteps the law, or says one thing and does another. Let me give you an example. Congress gave you money to buy C-130s. We then found out from the press that the direction of the former Secretary of Homeland Security, you plan to purchase 2 shiny new G700 executive jets. When you came to brief Congress, you told us, don't worry, we're gonna get reimbursed so we can buy and missionize 6 C-130s and purchase flight simulators. Secretary Noem left, and to my knowledge, you still have not been reimbursed. So I will make my point again. Congressional oversight isn't just important, it is necessary. Now I want to be clear, I support the Coast Guard and I want to make sure the service has the resources to fulfill its mission. That means more Coast Guard funding. I could not agree more with the current and former Commandant that you are currently a $20 billion service and deserve that level of funding. I believe all of my colleagues on this subcommittee agree. But as Congress provides more funding and the size of the service grows, the Coast Guard must remain accountable. Congress works, sometimes for years, on negotiating changes to the law based on issues or the needs of the service. Unfortunately, we often have to revisit those laws because the Coast Guard deceptively changes regulations, implements incorrectly, or refuses to enforce altogether. Not only is this frustrating for Congress, but more importantly, this hurts the readiness and resiliency of the service members who rely on steady, principled leadership to do their jobs. Proper oversight and meaningful legislative change depends on trust and transparency, and the Coast Guard needs to do better in this respect. As we move forward with today's hearing, I look forward to hearing an update from the Coast Guard on the implementation of my Small Passenger Vessel Safety Act. In the Elijah E. Cummings Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2020, Congress enacted my bill, the Small Passenger Vessel Safety Act, which included several changes that increased the safety of small passenger vessels. This legislation came following the tragic loss of 34 lives when the motor vessel MV Conception caught fire off of my district. As a result, I have worked to ensure no family loses their loved one again in similar ways. And in the Don Young Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022, I fought to ensure victims or their families, like the ones from the Conception boat fire, can recoup the damages they are owed when there is negligence. The last update I received from the Coast Guard is that the service was working expeditiously to update regulations and enforce all but one requirement: updates to safety management systems. I look forward to hearing from the Coast Guard today about your efforts to complete full implementation of that law. As I conclude my remarks, I want to say that there is truly no organization like the Coast Guard in the world. Our country is undoubtedly safer because of their service. Every time we call on the Coast Guard, they've answered. I look forward to hearing from the Coast Guard on spending plans, policy changes, and policy implementation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now want to welcome our witnesses today, and I want to thank you both for being here. Briefly, I'd like to take a moment to explain our lighting system to our witnesses. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and red means conclude your remarks. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members of or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Admiral Schofield, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your continued support of the United States Coast Guard. The American people depend on the Coast Guard every day, and we deliver. We save lives, we control, secure, and defend the U.S. border and maritime approaches far at sea. We facilitate the safe and secure flow of commerce that relies on our ports, waterways, shipping, and merchant mariners, vital to America's economic prosperity and national security. And we also respond to crises or contingencies that may come with little or no warning. We conduct these missions across 4 operational domains that make us up the U.S. homeland. In the U.S. mainland, from the inland navigable waterways and Great Lakes, along the U.S. border and its approaches, throughout the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere, including the 2 U.S. territories in the Caribbean, in Alaska in its approaches, including the Arctic, in Hawaii and the 3 U.S. territories across the Pacific and their approaches, including remote areas of the U.S. exclusive economic zone in Oceania, and importantly, in cyberspace. Today, the nation is asking more of the Coast Guard than ever before. To meet this demand, we are transforming our service to become a more agile, capable, and responsive force. This transformation rests on 3 foundational pillars which we're here to discuss today: the Coast Guard Authorization Act, the historic funding provided in fiscal year 2025 budget reconciliation, and our blueprint for modernization force design. First, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 25 provides the critical authorities we need to modernize and deliver results at speed and at scale. We are actively implementing its provisions, integrating new mandates, and strengthening our oversight. This law enhances transparency and enables us to deliver greater capability and accountability to the American people. Second, the nearly $25 billion provided by the fiscal year 2025 reconciliation represents a historic and vital down payment on the future of the United States Coast Guard. We are moving with a clear sense of urgency to turn this investment into capability. To date, we have obligated more than $14 billion to acquire new assets like the Arctic security cutters and offshore patrol cutters, to modernize our aircraft, and to invest in our critical infrastructure. We are on target to obligate $20 billion by the end of this calendar year. However, I must be clear, while this investment is crucial, it is a down payment, not the final payment. Without consistent, predictable, annual top-down line growth, our continued success, and importantly, our readiness is at risk. We must continue to complete the acquisitions advanced by reconciliation, including the infrastructure required to support these assets and house Coast Guard families. Finally, force design is our blueprint to build the Coast Guard of the future. This is the most significant modernization effort undertaken in over a century. We are streamlining our organization to make faster decisions. We are investing in our people, our most valuable asset, and we are leveraging new technologies to extend the reach and effectiveness of our crews on the front lines. Thanks to the leadership of President Trump, Secretary Mullen, and Congress, the Coast Guard has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to strengthen America's maritime advantage. The authorities provided by the Coast Guard Authorization Act, the historic investment made through reconciliation, and the transformational reforms of force design has put us on a clear path to build the Coast Guard the nation needs. With your continued support, we will deliver the people, the capabilities, and infrastructure required to protect the American people, secure our maritime interests, and advance our nation's prosperity in an increasingly contested maritime domain. Our history makes one thing clear. When America invests in the United States Coast Guard, the Coast Guard delivers. Thank you, and I look forward to questions.
Gentleman yields. Ms. McNeil, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal and Larson, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to discuss GAO's examination of the Coast Guard's modernization efforts. For fiscal year 2026, Congress appropriated about $13.5 billion to the service. Congress also included nearly $25 billion in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in fiscal year 2025. This was the largest single commitment of funding in Coast Guard history. This funding was for Coast Guard procurement of cutters and aircraft and modernizing shore infrastructure and maritime surveillance systems. The service said these investments support the intent of force design, initiatives that include developing and increasing remote and autonomous systems and maritime domain awareness capabilities. It could also strengthen the Coast Guard's ability to counter drug trafficking, conduct search and rescue, and manage other missions. Given the historical amount of funding provided to the service, GAO has questions about what the Coast Guard has learned from prior recent reforms and if it is applying those lessons learned as it implements force design. Since 2019, we assessed 4 Coast Guard reform efforts. 1, addressing sexual misconduct. 2, modernization of mission planning and mission support functions. The 3rd was reorganization of its reserve component. And 4th, reorganization of its deployable specialized forces. Key gaps in Coast Guard's reform efforts that we consistently identified include issues like, what was the service trying to achieve and how would it know if it reached the goal? Second, what process and related information was used to develop these reforms? Third, what practices did the service put in place to ensure sustained leadership focus during implementation and sustained tracking of progress throughout the implementation phase? We found some similar gaps when we reviewed Coast Guard's force design. We found that the key documents related to force design need to be updated so that it is clear how the reform is aligned with the Coast Guard's missions and desired outcomes, and that it includes measurable targets for each emphasis related to organization, people, technology, and contracting and acquisition. The service also needs to develop an evaluation plan that includes mechanisms for assessing the effectiveness of reform actions, clarify for yourself and decision makers what success looks like, and how will the service know when it gets there. We are making 2 recommendations today to the Coast Guard to address these gaps. We look forward to working with the Coast Guard as it continues to move forward with its efforts to transform the service into a more capable and agile force that meets current and future challenges. Thank you for inviting us today.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony. We'll now turn to questions from the panel. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Admiral, Section 7111 of the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025 requires the Coast Guard to produce an initial home porting plan that describes the home ports for current cutters and aircraft and where the future aircraft and surface assets that the Coast Guard is acquiring will be based. We require this report to facilitate the service's long-term planning for the billions of dollars of surface and air assets funded by Congress that will be coming online over the next decade. I fear that if the home port planning does not begin soon, the Coast Guard will be left with a fleet of new aircraft and cutters that will have nowhere to go. The report was due last week. When can we expect the report? And can you explain the priority of the service is giving, the Coast Guard priority service is giving to finalize its long-term planning needs?
Chairman, the continued planning for the home ports and acquisitions is very important to the Coast Guard, and we're continuing to work on that report and plan to have that by the end of the calendar year.
Thank you. This is one that's very, very dear to me. Too often, the Coast Guard has selected the lowest cost bidder for the projects, even if they lack the proper experience or skill sets, which has resulted in program delays, cost overruns, and outright contract cancellations. The Coast Guard Act of 2025 provides that the Coast Guard the ability to select contractors based on the holistic criteria, including their skill set, so that we are not forced to select the cheapest bidder who can't actually do the work. It is crucial that the service properly utilize these reforms. Can you describe how you anticipate the Coast Guard using this new authority so that you are able to deliver the best value for the taxpayer?
Chairman, thank you for the question. There's no doubt this authority affirms the Coast Guard's ability to select acquisition proposals that represent the best value to the American people. While cost is certainly one factor, other selection criteria such as schedule, past performance, demonstrated experience, as you mentioned, or other technical factors can also inform that selection, while supporting competition among capable industrial partners. So we're going to continue to use that and appreciate your efforts in that authorization so we get that best value to the American taxpayers.
Thank you. Ms. McNeil, the Coast Guard is undertaking Force Design 2028, which aims to modernize the service to meet its future needs. In your initial review, have you determined whether the service has established success criteria or measures for any of its lines of effort with respect to force design?
So based on our assessment of the 3 documents that we were able to obtain about force design, we have found a few gaps that we would expect to see, and that's why we based our recommendations on that assessment in terms of ensuring that it's clear how force design is linked to its mission and its outcomes that it's trying to achieve with force design. So making sure that there's a clear line between the efforts planned and what is the purpose behind force design. And there needs to be measurable targets so you can chart that progress made toward those goals. So that's what's missing. And then there needs to be an evaluation component as well. So as you're making progress, you're charting your path, you're meeting interim goals, what's the effectiveness, what's the impact of force design? In past federal efforts to do big reforms, especially when there's a lot of money involved, when you're making progress or you're going down a path and you're finding that you're not making progress, it's time to pivot. And it's time to target the very precious taxpayer dollar into other efforts that might be worth more and more impactful. And so that's some of the things that we would recommend today.
Thank you. I'm going to go through this one pretty quick. Similarly, part of the expansion in workforce will certainly require a large civilian workforce. You were asked to conduct a study on the employment, compensation, competitive assignments, and retention of civilian and military personnel. While early in the process, can you offer any insight at your current findings on civilians?
I'm sorry, I'm not clear about what that question was.
I'm not either. Part of the expansion in the workforce will certainly require a larger civilian workforce. You were asked to conduct a study on employment compensation, competitiveness, assignments, and retention of civilian and military personnel. While early in the process, can you offer any insight at your current findings?
We'll have to get back to you on that particular question. We'll get a response for the record.
Thank you. I yield back. Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As usual, I defer to our ranking member, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vice Admiral Schofield, where do we stand on the process of reopening stations that were closed or downsized due to workforce shortages?
Ranking Member Larson. So just recently, the Commandant directed the Deputy Commandant for Operation and our two operational commanders to identify and prioritize these stations to return to their former operating statuses. We are focusing on manning boat and air stations to workforce levels to operate safely and effectively moving ahead. In the fiscal year 27 President's budget, it does support this by adding 1 to 2 additional boat crews across our 166 stations. So we're going to, once we receive our budget, merge that with the priorities, we'll return members to those units in the mission priority outcome level.
Can I clarify what you said? You said 1 to 2 boat crews per station?
1 to 2 boat crews per station
Okay,
of
yeah.
the 166 stations.
All right, yeah. And then what about maintaining that year after year as you meet recruitment goals and putting people back at the stations with the platforms they need to do their job?
Yeah, we're working up that full plan, and we'll be able to brief the committee when we're ready to do that, sir.
Will that be part of the force redesign, or is this going to be complementing it? Like, it can't be totally separate. I get that, but does it have to take place within the force redesign, or can it take place?
Yeah, this is separate from the force design efforts here. This is getting our workforce back up to strength and being able to get to the end strength that we need of another 15,000 members to serve across the Coast Guard.
That's helpful. Thank you. So I know that Admiral Lundy has made the eradication of sexual misconduct a priority. What steps is the Coast Guard taking to manage and monitor the success of its actions to combat sexual misconduct consistent with responding to OFA?
Sir, sexual assault is a violent crime that causes devastating trauma to all individuals, destroys that sacred trust between our teammates, and we acknowledge that, and really degrades our ability to execute our missions. The Commandant released his first action order this year, which was labeled Combating Sexual Assault. So he takes that very, very seriously. And it sets forth the service's direction on combating that sexual assault and the criminal behaviors that enable it. His order is clear and unwavering. We will hold those who commit these crimes accountable under law and policy. And
Can I ask, so that several provisions in the Coast Guard authorization addressed updating standards and then training for service members. Does this order respond to those standards updating?
The order actually basically requires us to, and the Vice Commandant has already chartered a sexual assault prevention response recovery committee to work all of those requirements.
And is it consistent with completing the statutorily required strategy and action plan on the Independent Review Commission's recommendations on sexual misconduct?
Yes, sir.
Record retention in general has been a problem at the Coast Guard with the requirement in the SASH title for advanced records retention for victims. Has the Coast Guard used any of the funding appropriated in the last 2 years to modernize your records retention with regards to the SASH title?
So we continue to look at that system and modernize it. I don't have a current status, but I can get back to you with the status.
Can you get back to us with that, please? I very much appreciate it. Also, in my opening comments, I noted the termination of various associations that could be used as important channels for the Coast Guard to use feedback. How are you filling in the gap now that the administration has cut off these particular associations? How are you filling in the gap in order to get feedback and response from groups within the Coast Guard about sexual harassment and conduct and progress towards eliminating both?
So, sir, we're continuing to work this across all our commands as part of our readiness initiatives, as well as feedback directly from the field to our SAPR committees, personnel, and as we work towards really a cultural index across the Coast Guard and how we're doing.
You need to take this seriously and show the steps that you're taking, the sexual misconduct and harassment, the history of it seriously, as well as moving forward. This committee and the Congress has told you to do that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Vice Admiral, it's good to see you again. Thank you for your testimony. I have a few questions. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act provides sufficient funds to build 2 polar security cutters, and as well as procure long lead time items that go on the third one. So we kind of get a head start there. Can you provide an update on the PSC program?
Sir, I understand the question to be just give an update on the Polar Security Cutter program.
Yes.
So, sir, we have funded hulls 1 and 2 and partially funded hull 3 in that program. We continue to make great progress in that construction, and we're excited to continue to build the first polar security cutters in over 50 years.
Do you know could you give an assessment of the progress? I mean, what type of time frame are we looking at, a little more specific?
Yes, sir. We're looking to deliver the first polar security cutter by the end of 29.
29? Are they progressing? You're not waiting for 29 to start the second one, right? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They continue to work the materials, the learning from hull 1, and continuing that construction effort.
So the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025 provides for Coast Guard this ability to select contractors based on something other than just price. Do you have kind of an idea of how that new authority is going to be used?
Chairman, that authority is going to be used within our best value continuum, our best value efforts in contracting. We can use that as part of the factors within that best value continuum.
So as long as a contractor has the ability to do the program, cost would be some part of that decision, right?
Sir, can you repeat that question?
Well, as long there's a lot of talk about somebody not being qualified, so if they were a low bid, they wouldn't get the job. But if somebody has the ability to do it and yet bids in a reasonable manner, do you think that it's not just cost, but that will provide part of the solution of who you would choose?
Yes, sir. As part of that, in the solicitation, we would make sure that we put all those factors that are important to selecting the best value for this contract. We can do that beyond price. We can do technical factors, past performance, experience, facilities, et cetera.
Does it speed up the process by not having to use price as the only, or does it slow it down?
Best value can be a good way to get to a final contract to make sure that the contract's executable and staying on track.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vice Admiral Schofield, in my statement, I talked about the importance of steady principle leadership. During consideration of the last Coast Guard Authorization Act, Congress considered changes to manning requirements on articulated tug barges, ATBs. We didn't make those changes because, in part, the admiral in charge of prevention and the commandant at the hearing said, quote, "We do not believe that the technology is sufficiently advanced in robotics and automation to be able to reduce below the current levels," end quote. Yet last month, we got notice that the Coast Guard made the changes through regulatory action. So what changed? Was the commandant wrong? What was the epiphany that led to a major change in direction?
Sir, the safety of our mariners and our ships and the impact on our waterways is really important to the Coast Guard, and we continue to work that. Over the past...
I'm glad that's the case,
Yes,
but
sir.
that wasn't the question.
Yes, sir. Over the past decade, the Coast Guard has worked on this articulated tug and barge manning requirements with all the stakeholders and continue to assess. The updated policy provides a safe and balanced approach to that manning.
I understand, but what changed?
It was really our review with the overall risk posture across the manning, the systems on board, and how they're operated.
Thank you. Vice Admiral Schofield, in the Coast Guard's Authorization Act of 2020, Congress included new safety management systems requirements for covered small passenger vessels. The Coast Guard has issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, but has never moved forward with a formal NPRM or final rule. This is a major safety concern that even the National Transportation Safety Board has called for since 2012. When can we expect a final rule, or is the Coast Guard going to continue disregarding the law? And the remainder of the requirements such as fire suppression and egress remain as delayed as interim rules. Are we going to see final rules for these as well?
Sir, the passenger vessel safety is an unwavering Coast Guard priority for us. We enforce that 100% compliance, as you mentioned, with the interim safety rules mandated by the Coast Guard. That includes that interconnected fire alarms, our secondary escapes requirements, and overnight watches to prevent these tragedies at sea. We're continuing to evaluate, and we're looking to get that full rulemaking.
Do we have a sense when the final rule will come forward?
I don't have a date, but we can get you an answer on the record.
Great, thank you. And also on the fire suppression and egress issues as well. Ms. McNeil, while I'm glad that the Coast Guard is investing in housing in Santa Barbara, finally, I'm concerned that the shoreside infrastructure account in the President's budget is woefully inadequate to address the totality of the Coast Guard's needs. Given the GAO's report that the shoreside infrastructure backlog is over $7 billion and growing daily, what is your best recommendation for the service to get this backlog under control? I think I already heard about the pivot. Maybe this is a time that they can pivot and create a better quality of life for all our coasties, instead of doing all these exquisite, ridiculous things that at the end of the day, we can't execute because we don't have healthy, good morale amongst our coasties.
I would agree. There needs to come a time where there's some clarity about what a success looked like. And if you've invested a certain amount of money, resources, and time on efforts, and they're not achieving what those intended outcomes are, it's time to explore other options and alternatives and do some cost-benefit analysis. And it's okay to pause, reassess, and reinvest. And so that's the suggestion that I would make here.
Thank you. Vice Admiral Schofield, last week a pregnant endangered fin whale was struck and killed by a cruise ship in Seaward, Alaska, highlighting the need for additional measures to protect whales. Given the success of whale deaths in the Puget Sound, can this be replicated in other parts of the country?
Sir, the safety of all vessels in our waterways and marine whales, fish, et cetera, is important to the American people. We can continue to invest in further cetacean deaths across the Coast Guard if resources are provided, sir.
So it can be replicated in other areas?
It can be with the appropriate resources. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Begich, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question for Admiral Schofield, we saw last week a helicopter crash near Sitka, and it's a sobering reminder of the dangers our Coast Guard crews face in Alaska. Fortunately, all 4 members of the crash survived and recovering from their injuries. What is the latest in the investigation, and what steps are being taken to ensure aviation safety operations in Alaska are improved?
Sir, that certainly is a tragedy for all those members that were involved in the accident, as well as all Coast Guard men and women that continue to stay on the watch out there. We have initiated a mishap analysis board and further an investigation on that situation, so we continue to monitor that. We have a robust process, sir, to review the recommendations of the analysis board to make sure that future operations are impacted by those strategies out there. We've been doing that for many, many years, and it's been very prudent and very beneficial for our policy and our operational use.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to continuing that conversation outside this hearing. The budget reconciliation bill provided $3.5 billion for Arctic security cutters and $4.3 billion for polar security cutters. I was very excited by the recent announcement that the first 2 ASCs will be home-ported in Kodiak, with a subsequent ASC home-ported in Seward. Can you provide an update on the acquisition timelines, current obligations, and delivery schedules for the Arctic security cutters and polar security cutters programs? And then in addition, what are the major infrastructure needs and upgrades required for Kodiak and Seward to support these home portings?
Sir, thank you for that question. And these Arctic security cutters are going to provide value for the American people across our waterways and in the northern approaches. Importantly, we have 3 contracts definitized and working towards the delivery of those vessels for up to 11 vessels. So those have started. We're looking to have the first several delivered in 28.
And GAO puts the shoreside infrastructure backlog, as was mentioned by my colleague, at over $7 billion, with half of Coast Guard facilities beyond their service life. Reconciliation provided $4.4 billion for shoreside construction. What portion of that backlog is attributable to Alaska installations specifically, and how are Alaska projects being prioritized in the spending plan?
So I can get back to you with the exact number for the Alaskan backlog, but that's important because several of our first ships are going into that region to operate. So those areas are very, very important to the Coast Guard, and we continue to complete upgrades in Kodiak and in Seward for our fast response cutters, and we're currently assessing needs across Alaska to support our operations.
That would be great if you could get back to me on that. What I'd be looking for is, what is the gap? What is the planned appropriation within the Coast Guard for the funds that were made available through budget reconciliation? And what is the timeline through which those funds will be deployed and for what? If I could get an itemized list from your team, that would be very helpful. And appreciate all the work that you're doing in Alaska. Appreciate that you're prioritizing Alaska. This is a historic investment, as we all know, for the Coast Guard, and Alaska is central to it. Appreciate your work and your team's mission. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this hearing. Very, very important. And I want to also thank the GAO for their ongoing reports. It appears as though there's some $25 billion of new money for the Coast Guard. For years and years, the Coast Guard has always been the neglected portion of our national security. That has changed as a result of recent legislation, and I'm very happy about that. However, I am concerned about how that money is going to be spent. Admiral, you've already said that some significant amount has been obligated and more will soon be obligated. My line of questions goes to the organizational structure to ensure that that new money for vessels, aircraft, sustainment, personnel, and infrastructure is being spent wisely. Could you please describe to us how you are organizing your staff to carry out the responsibility of acquiring the vessels, aircraft, also what your sustainment program is? Have you changed the organizational structure to carry out this enormous new task?
Sir, as we really, and I really appreciate the support of this subcommittee and with this reconciliation effort, because that really helped support the future of the Coast Guard. As part of our force design, we did consolidate both our sustainment and acquisition under one Deputy Commandant for Systems. Importantly, that one person is responsible for the acquisition and the sustainment of these assets moving ahead under 5 PEOs, including the new Robotics and Autonomous Systems PEO, to be able to complete oversight and ensure that we're putting the money into the right areas within our budget and ensuring that the money is properly spent.
Has the GAO done an analysis of the organizational structures necessary to carry out these tasks and spend the money wisely?
So we have not embarked on.
Why have you not?
We would love to do that work. We can help craft a request.
Yeah, all nicey-nicey. What do you need to oversee the Coast Guard's implementation of the expenditure of some $25 billion new dollars?
A mandate or a request letter, and we'll be on it.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest that we provide such a mandated request letter, that the GAO carefully, consistently review the structural organization necessary to wisely spend this money. Admiral, are you confident that you have one admiral responsible? What staff does that admiral have to purchase these equipment, to make sure that the sustainment money is available, spare parts and pieces, and also the infrastructure, and also the personnel? I'm curious about your organizational structure.
Yes, sir. What we've done is aligned all those responsible authorities under that one person to make sure.
And what is his staff?
Sir?
What staff does he or she have to carry out that responsibility?
So the head of contracting works for the Deputy Commandant for Systems, as well as each one of the program executive offices work directly for the Deputy Commandant for Systems.
I would appreciate you would deliver to this subcommittee, and certainly to me, the organizational structure that you have in place, the personnel that you believe necessary to carry out the multiple tasks to wisely and efficiently spend the $25 billion new dollars. My final point goes to sustainability. The U.S. Navy has a serious sustainability problem, as does the Air Force. What steps are you taking to assure that the sustainability of the existing and the new fleet of aircraft, vessels, and ports is carried out and sustained over the years ahead?
Sir, I appreciate the 25 budget reconciliation helped us jumpstart that with some funding to get after some of our legacy backlog needs for sustainment. But we are a $20 billion Coast Guard operating on a $14 billion budget, and we need to continue, and I request your continued...
Here's my concern, Mr. Chairman, is the three-letter word "but" that you just put forward. It is absolutely essential, in my view, that you have an organizational structure in place, the personnel necessary, and the direction, not only to get the new equipment, but also to sustain it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Fuller, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Schofield and Director McNeil, thank you so much for being here. This is mainly directed initially at the folks in the row behind you and the rest of the Coast Guard. Before taking on this job, I was an elected district attorney. And what the Coast Guard does each and every day by showing such incredible courage, by jumping on submersibles and taking down drug runners, quite literally saved lives in my Appalachian community. So I want to say thank you, because we were losing far too many people, and I'm so appreciative of the incredible work that you guys are doing. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for saving lives. One of the things that I wanted to do up here on Capitol Hill was punch the Communist Party of China in the face. And so one of the things that I want to talk to you about specifically related to the Force Design 2028 and countering China in the gray zone. Admiral, I'm interested specifically as it relates to the Arctic and Antarctic. Do you have the authorities that you need to counter China in the gray zone?
Yes, sir. We continue to assess what our needs are up in the Arctic area. We are putting an emphasis on the Arctic region with that as we build out these new assets to go into line, and as well as we continue to build out our 15,000 members under the President's vision of the Coast Guard of the future. That will help support that region to make sure that we can control, secure, and defend the maritime border.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, when I was a district attorney, we used asset forfeitures a lot to fund law enforcement activities. And so I was wondering, Chairman Ezell described you guys in this hearing as, for the Coast Guard, chronically under-resourced. And I just wanted to kind of get an understanding when it comes to the asset forfeiture, specifically related when the Coast Guard is involved. Can you walk me through the process of an asset forfeiture and how that relates back to the Coast Guard?
Yes, sir. I don't have all those details, but I can get back to you with my staff to give you a brief on all those steps on the asset forfeiture process.
Okay. And then specifically, do you have, and I don't need a dollar figure, but do you have an understanding that some of the asset forfeitures that you're a part of and making, are any of those resources coming back to the Coast Guard?
Most of the asset forfeitures go back to Treasury.
Go back to Treasury. So as far as you know, nothing directly going back to the Coast Guard, despite y'all are on the front lines putting your lives on the line, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Gold, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Ranking Member, and welcome to our witnesses. I'll start by asking a topic that I talk about a lot here, the acquisition of an additional heavy Great Lakes icebreaker. This year was particularly difficult for late and early winter shipping on the Great Lakes with numerous delays. U.S. carriers lost weeks stuck in the ice and couldn't deliver the necessary raw materials that drive American manufacturing. The Coast Guard has cited the need for additional heavy Great Lakes icebreakers as well, and most recently included it in the service's unfunded priorities list. Still, we haven't seen meaningful meaningful action towards acquisition. Vice Admiral, can you please explain why, despite the clear need here, the service has yet to provide its strategy outlining how the Coast Guard will complete the design and construction of a Great Lakes icebreaker with the same capabilities as Mackinac? And in your answer, if you could include some references to some of the overall organizational structure within the Coast Guard and how and who is responsible for making sure these things happen and on time.
Ma'am, we are diligently working on that report currently on that future acquisition, importantly to meet all the statutory requirements of Title 14. We have fiscal year 27 has funding for all those acquisition requirements. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the requirements by the 2022 NDAA to create the publicly available database, can you just remind me, what's the deadline for that?
We're currently working on that now, and I can get back to you with a date from my staff.
Okay, but internally, you guys don't have a goal that you're working towards, like, we got to get this done by next week, we got to get this done by 2030?
I don't have the specific date with me.
Okay, it seems like that would be very, very helpful in terms of backwards planning to see when we want to have this available, when the American people can expect answers. This is obviously a huge deal, not just for the Great Lakes, but for the entire country that relies on the Great Lakes economy. These delays have been costly, and at a time when the affordability crisis is absolutely crippling American families, it's essential.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll await your response on that one then. HR 2 made a historic investment in the Coast Guard to counter chronic underinvestment. I was thrilled to see the infusion of $25 billion in the Coast Guard to recapitalize its surface, air, and shoreside assets. However, I'm deeply concerned with the administration's track record when it comes to contracting. Earlier this year, I requested the DHS Inspector General investigate allegations that Sean Planky, who was at the time acting as a senior advisor of the Secretary of the Coast Guard, was simultaneously consulting for a Coast Guard contractor despite likely being in a position to review substantial contracts. Vice Admiral, can you please touch on how the Coast Guard is ensuring that it is wisely using HR 1 investments, which I may remind you is not free money. These are taxpayer dollars, the hard-earned tax dollars of people in Michigan's 3rd Congressional District, to responsibly recapitalize the service rather than potentially enrich members of the administration?
Yeah, ma'am, importantly, we are buying really needed assets and capabilities and infrastructure to get after the needs of the nation. For reconciliation, we have major shore projects that include Training Center Cape May. We've worked that project at the Coast Guard Yard to be able to maintain those vessels in building out Guam, Newport, and
again,
Kodiak.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the question was about the fiscal responsibility of this historic investment, which was huge. How are we making sure that there's not sort of inside deals being cut here? Specifically, we are concerned about these allegations against Sean Planky. How are you making sure that that is not continuing to go on?
Yeah, ma'am, we follow all the acquisition procurement rules as required by the Department of Homeland Security and within our head of contracting activity.
And what does that look like? I mean, in practice, who's making sure that they're followed to accuracy? I mean, this is what we're doing here right now by asking these questions. It's the essential function of our role in an oversight capacity. But internally, how are you making sure that happens? And again, I just want to stress to you, this is about wise and fiscally responsible usage of the American taxpayer dollars at a time when people can't afford to put groceries on their table.
Yes, ma'am. So we do have within our contracting and acquisition levels within the contracting organization, we have multiple levels of review, including a multi-million and above contracts go to department for that same review to make sure that they're following all the rules of acquisition.
Do you feel that there is adequate oversight, people who are personally invested, within the service, making sure that these dollars and cents are accounted for, and are you willing to take that personal responsibility as well?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that our policies do create that oversight necessary to meet all the FAR requirements and procurement rules.
Well, Vice Admiral, again, I thank you for coming before this committee. It's important to answer the questions of the American people, and we do ask you, back on a continued basis so we can continue providing that oversight. I'm over my time. Thank you for the few extra minutes. My good buddy, Mr. Ezell, thank you.
You sure?
He's
Mr.
like, cut her
Petronas.
off, cut her off. Thank you.
Mr. Petronas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank y'all for being here. You've got a great team of supporters and behind you there. They do a hell of a job. I'm sitting there looking at Kyle and everybody. Thank you for putting such an outstanding team. I actually share a wall with them, so every once in a while they get a little rambunctious, but I appreciate their service and making sure that the trains went on time. Curious, when it comes to planning and moving forward, and I'm sorry that I may have missed this, but this was already asked, but when it comes to planning stations for additional personnel, where are they going? Where do you want to put people?
So we are currently assessing, as I mentioned earlier, sir, that the Commandant directed the Deputy Commandant for Operations and the two operational commanders, our Atlantic Area Commander and our Pacific Area Commander. This really comes up all about the operational priorities within their regional domains. So where do we need to put folks based on our past data-centric driven operational outcomes that we need to assess and prioritize accordingly. So we're basing it on the missions that are out there, the risks to those missions, and then put the personnel and assets where the highest risk and need is across the service.
Sure. So, I mean, I would think Florida's an attractive place to send more personnel because I don't know if there's more encounter data of folks being out on the waterways. I love access to the resource, and I know there's a hell of a lot of people that enjoy the coast of Mississippi. So I just know everything along that whole Gulf Coast is something that people are moving. They're enjoying what we've got. I just like to make sure we're advocating for where the most encounter data is taking place, putting my 2 cents in. I know of the $25 billion, at least 8 of the $25 billion has been obligated for the acquisition process. Can you touch on the recapitalization with the money so far?
Sir, I understand the question to be maybe just touch on some of the recapitalization efforts across. I mentioned some of those items earlier. To give you some sense of the major shore projects that we're doing is at the Coast Guard Yard. We are upgrading that very old industrial site. That's really important for the future of the fleet and maintainability there. At Training Center Cape May, which is really, it's the birthplace of our enlisted workforce, we're putting funding there under the 25 reconciliation to really be able to be more efficient and effective so we can bring more folks into that accession point.
So speak to investments in Baltimore. I saw, is it dry dock operations or dredging?
Yeah, the dry dock operations, dredging, and also looking to purchase a dry dock.
Okay, so and so currently right now, are there already these type of operations being done in Baltimore, or is this a new investment?
This is a new investment. We're looking to have this done starting in the fall and completing by 2030 at the Coast Guard Yard.
And any particular reason why Baltimore was selected?
That's where our current Coast Guard Yard has been for.
Oh, so there's one there already.
There is one there already. What we're doing is with the dredging is making it capable for our offshore patrol cutters and national security cutters to come in there. Currently, they're not able to come in there, so we have more limited capability for vessels to be docked in that area.
So, so the Baltimore Yard right now does, updates, retrofitting.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't do new construction. It does major renovations as well as a normal yearly or 4-yearly maintenance plan.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for those answers. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Ms. McDonald-Root, thank you for your patience, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to wave on to ask these questions. So I come from a Coast Guard family. We have very proud auntie of 2 coasties, and it is critical for the district that I represent in Michigan. We're literally surrounded by coast. The Great Lake region has a $6 trillion regional economy, affects millions of Americans, holds 90% of the United States fresh water, and directly supports over 1 million jobs. But here's the thing. It gets really cold in the wintertime. I know you know this. And the Great Lakes freeze over, which hurts our commerce, it hurts maritime activity. So we have to really think about and invest in ice breaking. They can only do that when the fleet is fully operational. Last season, the Coast Guard's Great Lakes icebreaking fleet operated at reduced capacity because of engineering concerns with multiple vessels, including the heavy icebreaker, the Mackinac. So we feel that it very acutely. We lost 1/3 of the 2026 season, and it impacted billions of economic opportunity. I know you're aware of the Great Lakes Icebreaker Act, where we are really focused on how we can be at full capacity here. The act actually required the Coast Guard to outline how it will design, build, and deliver a new Great Lakes heavy icebreaker by March 18th of 2026. And the bill also required a report detailing that. We have not received any of those reports to date. And so as we're thinking about, it's hot as Hades outside right now, but we're already thinking about winter. And so with doing that, when can we expect the Coast Guard to deliver the overdue reports?
Ma'am, I'll have to get back to you on that specific date, but we are currently working on that report, and this certainly was a challenging winter across the Great Lakes and New England regions. It was really a historic ice season for 20-plus years, and we're continuing to assess and see how we can do better operations within those regions.
Yep, that would be terrific. I understand that there have been cuts, that you are short-staffed. I get that, but deadlines that are implemented, that are mandated by Congress, are not something to be taken lightly and ignored. And we actually need to have that information, and my constituents, frankly, are demanding it. I want to actually switch to another issue that I think has already been brought up a bit here, but it actually has to do with the Coast Guard station on the Saginaw River. I've asked about this before. I'm going to ask about this every chance I get. The facility was forced to cut its 24/7 search and rescue operations down to 40 hours, and we have seen our Coast Guard response time increase dramatically. It now can take the Coast Guard hours to provide critical life-saving support. So to fill this gap, we've had to rely on our local law enforcement, first responders, and honestly, just flat out Good Samaritans to help, particularly with water rescues in ice. Again, Michigan, there's a theme here, lots of ice, okay? So last winter, we saw nearly a dozen ice rescue calls, and our local law enforcement and our Good Samaritans came in, saved 15 lives without any additional support from the Coast Guard on the ground. This is our reality. Every winter, there are ice rescues. Every summer season, there are water rescues. And you know that the Saginaw Bay sits on Lake Huron, which is our country's northern border, and it only, to me, underscores the importance of this national security. So to measure the impact of these of the change of the station, last year's NDAA required the Coast Guard to submit an annual report measuring staffing response times. Based on the delays in implementing the Great Lakes Icebreaker Act, I'm concerned that we're also not going to get this report in matters that literally can mean life or death for the people that I represent. And I would love for you to also tell me when we can get that report. And lastly, I sent a letter to the Commandant calling for the reinstatement of full operations at the Saginaw River Station, and wondering if you have an update on that.
Well, ma'am, there's no doubt that the safety of all lives are our primary mission at all times. So we'll continue to do that, whether it's ice season or summer season. We'll continue to do that. I mentioned earlier the Commandant has tasked our operational commanders to come up with a prioritized report, which are based on those assessments across the entire operating area on the needs within those regions to put, as we have in the fiscal year 27 PRES budget, up to 1 or 2 additional boat crews through every boat station in the Coast Guard. And we're looking to see where we can best utilize those people to get after the mission needs of the American people.
I didn't really hear a delivery date on that.
We should have that report by the end of the calendar year. Yeah.
Gentlelady yields. I got a couple more questions on a second round. Wrap this thing up pretty quick. Admiral, after significant disputes over the bid award for the Waterways Commerce Cutters, the WCCs are finally under construction. Unfortunately, the WLI, the third WCC variant, is not part of the current design contract. The Coast Guard has preached that commonality among the 3 vessels designs is the key to limiting construction cost and maintaining a tight timeline. Excluding the WLI from the current design contract unwinds the commonality on which the WCC acquisition strategy is based. Does the Coast Guard plan to add the WLI to the current WCC design contract, or has the Coast Guard failed to heed the message in its own sermon?
Yes, sir. To start with, the construction and river tenders and inland tenders are all unique in what they do around the nation. On rivers, in coastal waterways, driving piles, working aids, and they're difficult. So what we've done initially was we've got construction tenders and river tenders that are in the current contract that are similar design. The 3 remaining vessels are unique. They're different. They work in areas that are more shallow, more directed areas that have unique capabilities for getting after aids and servicing. And we continue to work that acquisition strategy on how we're going to go ahead with the 3 WLIs.
During the lapses in appropriations in fiscal year 2026, the Coast Guard continued to pay military members even after payroll accounts were exhausted. The Coast Guard did so by using unobligated funds from other accounts, which was styled as a loan to payroll from those accounts. Can you provide an update on the status of these funds, and more specifically, have the funds been returned to the accounts for which they were intended?
Sir, I can give you a more detailed update on those separately with my staff.
Thank you. I yield back. Mr. Carbajal, do you have?
Thank you. I have a couple questions after all before I make an announcement. Admiral, at the beginning of last year, at the direction of the administration, the Coast Guard fired 25% of its flagged Corps officers. At the same time, you're looking to grow the workforce by 15,000. What data and studies does the Coast Guard have to justify that number?
Sir, this, from a force design perspective, this is about streamlining our service and taking out the decision layers across the organization. Importantly, putting frontline operators out in the field to get their missions done.
And the 15,000?
With the 15,000, yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. McNeil, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
When we looked at the past reforms since 2019, including the current one, force design, we've got a lot of questions about the data and information that was used to inform the decisions about specific reforms. And the one question that you just raised, we would love to see an answer to that question. How did they arrive at the reduction in the number of senior officers, and also how they arrived at this target of hiring 15,000? We don't know how they arrived at that decision. We're not sure what data and information they used, and we also don't know how that's tied to some type of an outcome or goal that they've established in the force design. It's a good question, and we'd love the answer to that.
As well as the organizational structure that has to occur for this to be an
Definitely.
effective change. Mr. Chairman, I'm done with my questions, but if it's okay with you, I wanted to take a minute to, in addition to the staff that you recognized earlier, I wanted to recognize our fellow, our Coast Guard fellow, Lieutenant Commander Amanda Gavlik, that is here. She's going to be leaving subcommittee staff at the end of this month. She's also being elevated to commander, and I hope to see her someday lead the Coast Guard because she has my full confidence in terms of her abilities and her talent. So I just want to take a minute to recognize her for the work that she's done here with our committee and our subcommittee, and I wish her the best in her future endeavors. And congratulations on being elevated, I think coming up in a few days, to commander as well. The Coast Guard's in good hands with people like her. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Are there any other further questions from any members of the subcommittee that have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing for today. I would like to thank each and every one of you for being here today and your witness testimony. The subcommittee stands adjourned.